The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be and whatever time you might be listening to this edition of Ask Claire along the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I am your host, Claire Hall, and I enjoy this program because I get to talk about things that interest me, people and places that interest me. And if you've been listening the few weeks this program has been on the air, you know that I have a wide range of interests, including reading, writing, great human stories, and I am proud and honored to welcome to the mic a great storyteller and Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, Tom Hallman, Jr. of the Portland Oregonian. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Claire. And I have to say, the introduction of what you like and what your show's about is exactly how I see the world. Lots of interest. Whatever interests me at the moment, I'm curious about, and that's the best way to live a life. So I like your philosophy.
Well, thank you. And, when people hear that you're a journalist, they might think of the kind of person who covers politics or fires or crime, which I know that you did for many years for the Oregonian, and certainly that is important work, but your work has really evolved, for the folks who haven't had the joy of reading your work, evolved beyond that to a very different dimension, perhaps, but yet using the same tools of telling human stories of all kinds. And help explain that a little better than I have, please.
Well, Clara, you did a good job on that. What I would say is that given our world that is so conflicted, and many of us searching for any kind of purpose in it, what binds us together is a story. Because a story reminds us of our shared humanity. And so the kind of stories I write about are not what would be considered newsworthy in the traditional sense of the word. But my philosophy over the last 20 years particularly is that a good story has truths that are more important than facts. So my stories get into the human soul, the human condition, and the eternal search for what is my purpose in life about. And that could be anywhere from a boy with a deformed face that seeks to be, quote, normal, that won a Pulitzer Prize. It's about a class where 12-year-old boys and girls learn how to dance. It could be about a grandson who, by the fluke of the internet, bought back his grandfather's DeSoto. And all of these stories make you feel something. And in this day and age, we don't feel enough. We read facts and we forget the purpose. And the purpose is to enrich our heart and soul and mind. And that's what a good story does. And that's what I seek.
And that is what you deliver beautifully week after week. And, if there is feeling out there, I don't know, maybe social media distorts the true feeling, but it just seems like there's so much fear and anger in our culture today, at least the culture that gets expressed in a lot of social media and certain talking heads on cable TV. But your stories always, even people who are struggling with, some of life's mightiest challenges, that they always have, it seems like, a hopeful element, an uplifting, a positive element.
And you're right, Claire, because the letters I receive from readers rarely say, "Oh, I love the beautiful sentence you wrote, Tom." Mm-hmm. What they say is, you introduced me to somebody that will change my life, make me think differently, reminds me of the good in the world. And a story can introduce people who you would never come in contact with to the rest of the world. And that I've done a story about an African-American woman who cleaned homes for 50 years and sent 4 kids through college. People who have never met an African-American see the dignity, courage, and love in her life, and it changes them. Or someone who is mentally disabled, and this man's dream was to live on his own and move out of his mother's house, and he did it. And they go, what independence, what courage, maybe I can incorporate some of that in my life. And so my philosophy is that the people I write about, in a sense, serve as teachers for the rest of us. And the greatest teachers are never one who stands at a podium and lectures, but they show how to live a life. And a life, all lives, and if your listeners are honest with themselves, have ups and downs, and strengths and weaknesses, and flaws and successes. And life is messy. So what I do is find something in a life that is worth a story. And I would say 90% of the people I write about have never been interviewed, not newsworthy, and if their story did not appear in the newspaper or online, would not make a difference. But when it does, it changes people. And that's why I believe, and I want your listeners, they feel the truth of this too, a story has a spiritual component to it, just the way a good piece of music does. When you hear a song, whether it's classical or rock or blues or country, whatever you like, something happens in your soul. And when you encounter a good story, it's the same thing. And so my belief as a storyteller is all I do is use words to unlock what is in the reader to begin with. Every one of your listeners, Claire, you and I have been the same way. We have cried. We've been hurt. We've hurt people. We've had ups and downs. And if you feel those things, then you connect with other people. And the job of a storyteller is to remind us of our shared connection. And that's what I do, and I love it. I've been doing it for 40 years.
And doing it extremely well. You know, we've only met in person once a couple of years ago when you came to Newport to do a talk to a local writers group, and yet, you know, instantly it felt like you were a friend, and you were a friend because I've been reading your work all through those decades, and you know, I think through introducing us to this amazing array of people and their stories, you know, I felt like I knew who you were and what your values were. And, you know, it's kind of a magical moment.
That's about the highest praise you can give me, Claire. And one of the things I want your listeners to consider is this. Every one of the listeners has a story that needs to be told. And that story does not have to appear in a magazine or in a book or in a newspaper. But it needs to be written down. And one of the things I've done the last 10 years in Portland is I teach storytelling classes to non-writers. And these stories help make sense of life. They're important for families. They're important to document a life because in the end, all you really have is your story. It's more valuable than your home or any asset. And I would encourage your leaders or your listeners to not put storytellers on any kind of pedestal. I've been doing it a long time, but we all have the inherent longing to tell stories and to hear stories, and it exists within each of the people that are hearing my words right now.
I'd agree. You have practiced the craft for a long time and honed the art. So, you know, one thing that I want to get back to that you said a couple of minutes ago is how probably 90% or more of the people that you've talked to, they wouldn't appear in the newspaper otherwise. And when you approach somebody about a story, being the subject of one of your stories, I imagine you get all kinds of reactions. Maybe some people are excited or honored, maybe some are wary, but how do you go about really, building a relationship with the subject, you know, even before you end up putting one word to paper?
Excellent question. Because as a storyteller, all I can do is bring myself to the story. And people have very good BS detectors.
Yeah.
I come in with no agenda other than tell me about yourself. Tell me about your journey, your hopes, your dreams. And so that means if I go interview someone that has an incredibly strong faith in God, I respect that. I listen to that. If I come across somebody who has no faith in God, who's an atheist, I listen to that. And so what I do is I'm simply the vehicle to tell their story in as pure a way as possible. Now, you said something that's true. Most of the people that I write about say, I don't have a story. Why are you going to come talk to me? And often I come into a situation where I have an inkling of a story, that something makes me curious, but I don't know the whole story. So together, through my questions, their answers, the story emerges as if out of the fog. And I did a story 10 years ago, and I'll bear with me. I'll tell you the genesis of how it worked, and this shows your listeners how I come across a story. I saw a piece of the Oregonian about the Rose Festival Princess selection, and this was from a private Catholic school. And for listeners who might be out of the area, Rose Festival is a tradition in Portland. Each school picks a princess, and then the princesses form a court, and they pick a queen that is the head of the Rose Festival. Well, I saw this minor story about a girl in a Catholic school who's picked as princess, and she said her twin brother was her hero, and her twin brother has Down syndrome. And that made me curious, and curiosity is the first toolbox. I thought, if something had happened in the womb, that boy might be the valedictorian of the school, and she might be the one learning how to spell cat. So I asked my editor, do you mind if I do something on this? They said, oh, who cares? It's the Rose Festival. I went to the reporter who wrote it. Oh, who cares? It's the Rose Festival, which is a reminder. Great stories don't have a neon light pointing right me, right me. You have to follow them. So I contact the family. I'm not really sure what I'm looking for. I talked to the mother. I talked to the father about the birth of their twins. I go talk to the girl, the princess, and she tells me, oh, he was my hero. And I say, Colleen, that's great. But tell me the truth. What was it really like? And she begins to cry. And the story is, when they were in the sixth grade together, the athletes, the popular boys, would pick on her brother. They would knock the books out of his hands and shove them in his locker. And he would look to her in the hallway for help, and she would turn the other way and walk away. Do you think there's a possible story there? There is.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The girl said, would you like to see my diary? So I have her diary. And this story is a beautiful, beautiful story, because the boy went to a public school and high school and was made the towel boy for the basketball team. This is a story about how we can change, because when that team won the state championship, the boy was asked to go up the ladder and help cut down part of the net, and he was afraid. And do you know who helped him? Those athletes.
Oh, the other athletes.
Athletes. The same kind of kids who bullied him.
Wow.
Okay, that story ran in Reader's Digest.
Mm-hmm.
It won me a national award.
Mm-hmm.
It was the beauty of the story, and that's where stories come from. Whenever you read a story, the writer never wants to. It's like Miles Davis said about jazz. You just hear it. You don't care how the guy practiced scales. A story should be so pure you think the person just sat down and wrote it. And what you don't see is what's happening behind the curtain. And that's what we're doing right now. I'm explaining how they come to be. And ultimately, all stories start with the curiosity of the storyteller.
Well, let's talk about another one of your really celebrated stories. And when it came out, it struck a chord with me. Bill Porter, The Life of a Salesman. And the reason, especially when that struck a chord with me, you mentioned him riding the TriMet bus and teenagers staring at him. And I hate to admit that many, many years ago, when I was a teenager in the Oh gosh, 3 summers. To get to my summer job, I rode the TriMet bus, and Mr. Porter was a regular on that same run.
Really?
And I remember, observing him, and I hoped I wasn't staring in an unkind way, but I just took note of the fact, this is a gentleman with some kind of physical disability, but he is so well groomed, and obvious, I sensed that every step was a struggle for him, but he had some kind of business purpose, and even then, maybe it was reporters' curiosity in me or just simple curiosity. I remember wondering, what was his story? And then many years later, you told it and told it beautifully. So, then thanks to it was a made-for-TV movie, right? The whole country got to know
Yes.
about Bill Porter. So,
And what was interesting about that story, and to this day I still get people asking me about it, that story never had the word disabled appear in it. That was not a story about a man with cerebral palsy. That was a story about a man who wanted to be engaged with and have an impact in the world. And his impact was selling stuff door to door. And he didn't want to do the story when I first met him. He couldn't figure out why there was a story. And I almost couldn't figure it out either. But I interviewed many, many people about him, and it was a story about courage, dignity, and perseverance. And those great themes touched people because we all want that in our life. And I think all of us, when we read that, we were, in a sense, the person you were on that bus looking. Because, let's be honest, we look at things and we go, oh, what is that? Who are they? And as we gain wisdom about life, we often look back at our own life and think, if I wasn't cruel, I was not sensitive. And so we saw both the dignity of Bill and the flaws in our own life. And that's growth. And that's why that story works.
And quite powerfully. You alluded to briefly earlier, and now I'd like you to talk, in some more depth about Sam, the boy behind the mask, the amazing story that won the Pulitzer for you, and you expanded into a book. And what a remarkable story that is.
Well, Claire, this is a very interesting story for 2 reasons. One, the personal, and the second, the story itself. Prior to the Sam story, I had won every prize you could win in American journalism for feature writing. And I had been a Pulitzer finalist twice, yet I had not won the Pulitzer. And the year before, I had a story that was fantastic, and it was a finalist. And that is an honor in itself, but still, it's, you lost. And when I lost, I was really devastated. I thought, it's not fair. I should have won it. And I had to really evaluate myself, why that award meant so much. Why did I need that award? What hole in my soul was winning that award supposed to fill? And I looked at myself, and I looked at my craft, and I looked at why I did this, and I ultimately came to the conclusion I was not a journalist or storyteller for awards, but to tell stories. 3 weeks later, the phone rings, and this person says, there's a child in town with a severely deformed face. He looks like the Elephant Man. Family has never told the story, but if they did, you would be the one to do it. That story won the Pulitzer Prize, and it won it because I was emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually ready to enter that world. Something else that happened that alludes to what you talked about being on the bus. When I met Sam, I walked to school with him one day, and we stood at the corner of 72nd and Sandy to cross the street. And the light changed, and the bus stopped, and all these people were looking at this boy. And if you looked at him, he was something you looked at. People assumed he was retarded or his mother used drugs. And as the people were looking at him, I wanted to say, I'm not with him. I'm just a reporter. Don't look at me.
Wow.
And in that honesty, I thought, oh my God, this boy, no matter where he goes, people look at him. And that helped form the theme of my my project,
Mm-hmm.
The Boy Behind the Mask, because all of us wear a mask. How we dress, how we present ourselves, we want to show the world who we are. But behind that, there's another person, another soul. And this boy could never reveal that because people stopped at the mask. So I took people into his life, into his journey, into the doctors. And it was a story about courage, love, family, science, medicine. And that won the Pulitzer Prize. Now we skip ahead, the Pulitzer ceremony. Wonderful ceremony. I'm glad I won it.
Mm-hmm.
But the Pulitzer itself is simply an 8 by 11 piece of paper with the name on it, and you won it. And I did not hang that in my house for 10 years until my wife finally framed it for Christmas. And the point of it is, and every one of your listeners can relate to this, whatever you do in your life, you must savor the process. If you are a farmer or a construction worker or a plumber or a politician, you like the process, because the finish line, if you chase the finish line, is not the reward. And so I learned that I like the process of storytelling. I like the doubt, the angst. And so that story ended up winning the Pulitzer and led to the first book. And since then I've written 3 other books. I've written stories for Reader's Digest. I wrote my first fiction last year. And in life, I think much of what we need is that confidence. I can do this, and that whatever field you're in. So that story did a couple things. It gave me the confidence, the piece of paper that says you're good, and the internal knowledge that what you ultimately rely on is your heart and soul in the craft. And so that was a life-changing kind of story for me.
And really affirmed that storytelling was your true professional and personal calling and what you wanted to do for the rest of your life, I assume?
Yes, it was. Now, if anybody's interested, I gathered a collection of my stories 2 years ago. They're in a book you can find on Amazon called Dispatches from 1320, which is the address of the old Oregonian. And they're my favorite stories that were written in that newsroom. And they all speak to what we've been talking about here. Stories about dignity and growth and life. And some are funny. But and so that you can find it on Amazon if your listeners want to look for it.
Yeah, and it's a great collection. I heartily endorse it. And, I like the fact that you picked 1320, the old address of the Oregonian, as the title. I mean, I can remember being, maybe a 12, 13-year-old touring that building, which then housed not only the Oregonian, but the Oregon Journal, and before the offset printing, the old letterpress in the basement, and kind of the smell
you know
of
the
ink.
building well.
Yep, and the clack of typewriters. And, of course, the modern technology of journalism is advanced in quality and speed, but I don't know, maybe it's just, there was am I the only one who thinks there was just something kind of more romantic about those days?
Claire, you make a good point in this way. There was romance, but we also need to embrace the technology.
Oh, sure.
Look at how because of this podcast, you and I are going to reach people we will never meet.
Exactly.
Through social media. I have a follower on my author page, Tom Hallman Jr. on Facebook, who's a baggage handler at an airport back east.
Mm-hmm.
Think of that.
Amazing. Yeah.
And one of the things that I do grapple with at my age is I long for part of the past. I delivered the journal, and when I got my iPhone, I had to have help from my kids telling me how to use the dumb thing. So I'm lucky I didn't somehow accidentally hang up on you here.
Yeah, really. I tell people the last time I felt I was ahead of the technological curve when I was the only person I knew who could program my VCR to do time shift recordings. That's how many years ago that was. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and it's as humans, we have the capability to adapt to our surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe we have the capability to adapt to changing society, changing worlds, being open and compassionate, and that's what I hope my stories do, is they remind us of our shared dignity. And there's nothing like talking to somebody, and in those conversations, you are a storyteller at a restaurant or on a bus or stranger, and you say, "How's your day going?" And you talk, and it enlightens your life and it enlightens their life. And so the technology can keep us in these silos. And those silos, I believe, is where we feel this isolation and loneliness. And a connection on Facebook is wonderful. Connection in your town where they go, "Claire, how are you doing today? Can you believe the weather?" Gives you a feeling far better than 100 likes on a thing you put up on Facebook.
Exactly. Tom, I guess we're moving into our last 5 minutes or so. So,
Okay.
I want to ask: is there any aspect of your work and of storytelling and journalism that we haven't talked about that you'd really like to share with the listeners?
I would say everybody listening should read. Reading gives you the ability to engage different parts of your senses and your soul. And we are surrounded by bad news. You cannot, in our time right now, you can't escape it. It's everywhere. And so if you pick up a story, I'm writing a story for next week about a 94-year-old man, served in the war, former teacher. He always wanted to play in a high school band. And on Friday night, he played the cymbals with the high school band at a football game. Now, that is an absolute dumb story when you think about it in terms of what's happening politically, the elections, all this stuff. However, when I talked to those kids, it made me feel good about the future of our country, because these kids are not jaded the way many of us are. They are hopeful, and they honor that man, and their innocence reminds us that we all have the capability to return to that, and stories are often the roadmap to get back to that place. So keep reading good work, support good work.
Yes, indeed. And I love that story, too, because it's a reminder of something. Well, my life right now is a 59-year-old transgender woman who came out publicly at 58, that it is never too late to live your life or to live your dreams. I was telling a friend one of the things I missed about not growing up as a little girl was never got to have a slumber party. And so why don't you have one? And so about a month ago, I did. And we sat around.
You better write about that.
Oh, I will. I'm even toying with doing a memoir about my transition, and that will be one of the things I talk about. But I said it's even better than if we were preteens, because we got to have mimosas at this slumber party.
That's really good. And I have to tell you, Claire, you are a teacher in your own journey, in your own honesty, in your own life of good, and reminding us of what I get back to and what I do, our shared humanity, our shared dignity, our shared longing to be who we are and move through the world with love and courage and respect. So I admire you, and I admire your honesty and respect your honesty for sharing your life in the way you do.
Well, thank you, Tom. That is very kind, and I consider that very very high praise from a true master of the art and craft. On that note, I think we're going to have to wrap it up, but maybe we could do this again sometime if you're game.
Anytime, Claire.
Okay, my guest
Thanks a lot.
You are welcome. My guest on Ask Claire has been Tom Hallman, journalist, Pulitzer Prize storyteller for the Oregonian, Oregon's largest newspaper. Look for Dispatches from 1320 on Amazon.com. A great collection of some of his favorite works. And until I come up with a more original closing, I'm going to once again borrow happy trails to you all until we meet again.